This is my little garden and it's turned into such an overwhelming grassy mess. It honestly felt pretty overwhelming because it's a lot of work to get it cleaned up and I wanted to get it back into shape before summer. So while you watch me clean it up, I'll share with you the things that I did and what I'm doing differently so this won't happen again. When my husband and I built this garden 2 years ago, we decided to put underneath the gravel some heavy-duty weed block fabric. I tried a few different tools to pull up the grass, but worried about pulling up the weed block or poking holes into it, so I ended up deciding to hand pull all of this grass. It's been really rainy this spring in central Ohio, so I wanted to try to get as much done every day that it didn't rain before it starts getting hot. This was a really nice day, so my husband was also out mowing, and when I was reviewing footage of this time lapse, no, see, when he drove by, he was blowing the blower right in my face. So this right here is the picture that I sent to all my friends and family. But as far as pulling up the grass goes, it really wasn't too bad to pull it up. I was able to shake the rocks away, and the grass was just growing on top of the fabric. It was just hard to be on my hands and knees for this. So this is my first day's progress before I had to stop for the evening. The next day was a Saturday, and the thing that I was afraid of happened. It was sunny, hot, and humid. I don't really like wearing sunscreen, so I covered up as much as I could, which, probably makes it a little bit worse, but I was sure to take a lot of breaks. I was trying to take advantage of every day where it wasn't raining. We got a lot of rain in early spring, which made it harder to get outside, and that's one thing I want to do differently in my garden and yard work. I could definitely do better about taking advantage of rainy days. I don't really want to be outside when it's raining, but there are days where there are breaks in the rain where I could just put on some gear and make some progress, even if it's a little bit. When reviewing this footage, I realized that I hadn't been putting my belt through all the loops in my pants, so I'm going to spare you that view. While I was doing all this work, I wasn't really listening to anything while I was outside, just being outside instead. But the thing that kept running through my mind was, this is the thing I always wanted. I signed up for this. This is the thing I always wanted. It'll be good after it's done. It's definitely motivating to see the progress so far. That's all the grass cleaned up on the inside. But I knew the next part was going to be the most challenging, and that is the perimeter. When my husband and I built this garden 2 years ago, we started with some deer fencing because we definitely have a lot of deer, but it turns out that what I needed to worry the most about was rabbits. So eventually we put up this chicken wire to keep the rabbits out. And one of the things that I think was kind of a mistake at the time was putting the chicken wire on the outside of the edging. When it comes to weed eating and trimming the grass, the weed eater would tear up the chicken wire, so it never got trimmed. Last year we hired a landscaper to do some of the heavier work and asked him to cut out the grass around the garden so we could mulch it and then make it easier to maintain. So this is where the real nightmare begins. So again, I tried a bunch of different tools to pull up the grass, but what we have is a lot of clay in our soil, so it was really hard to pull anything up. I'll admit that I got into this state because I got pretty discouraged last year because a groundhog got into the garden. I tried to fix the fence and block where it was getting in, which is right here. But I didn't really put up that much of a fight because I was already struggling to grow stuff for that year. But after struggling for a long time pulling up this grass, I finally decided that I was going to take down this fence. The biggest issue was that the grass on the edges was weaving itself through the fence, which made it really hard to either pull it up or dig it out. So I took the fence down, even though I knew that meant letting the rabbits and possibly the groundhog into the garden. And when I checked the Ring camera the next day, it was definitely there. It's right there. So they were just having a time going all through what's left of my garden. So we did have a few rainy days in between this project, so the garden stayed open for a little while. But the next nice day I was back to trying to pull up all of that grass. I tried a bunch of different tools again to figure out how to get the grass out, and what ended up working the best was a regular digging shovel. So I cut the grass back as much as I could with a little handheld grass shear and then dug up the grass. I finally felt like I was making real progress after taking that fence down. It made it so much easier, even though it was still really tough to get that grass out.
There's just no wind today. It makes this awful.
So I was back at it again in the heat. I got a new garden accessory, which I was really excited about. It's a kneeling bench that you can use as a seat. I like it a lot more than the knee pads I was wearing previously. It was so hot that even sitting in the hot air from the air conditioning unit actually felt good, so that's kind of crazy. But at least some air was moving in that area, so I definitely had to take a lot of breaks because it was really hot. It's probably hard to see in a time lapse like this, but there were a few times where I was taking some pictures because there were definitely some gigantic spiders. I definitely don't mind spiders, but I will spare you those pictures. After all that work, I was finally able to remove the second half of the fencing. It was very hot and this was very tiring, and by the end of the day, I decided I would do as much as I could and then clean up the next day when it was supposed to be hot again. My garden gets a lot of sun, but usually by about 6 or 7 p.m. it's covered in shade, which makes it nicer to work on in the evening. So this is the progress of all of that grass being removed. Almost done. So close. This has definitely not been consecutive days of cleaning out my garden, so you can see that there are some volunteer plants popping back up inside. I woke up in the morning and I checked the camera to see if the bunnies were in the garden. Yep. Do you see the bunny on the left eating the clematis? Honestly, after a while, I lost track of how much time it had actually taken to get all of this done. There were days when I was too tired to go outside, even though I was getting closer and closer to being done. I did try to get out as much as I could, but with work and some volunteer work that I do, it made it harder to get to it. It also turns out that I have a vitamin D deficiency, which, with how much I cover up when I go outside, is maybe not that surprising. But finally, all the grass on the perimeter was removed, so now I could put the fence back up again and secure it to the posts. I did decide to move the fence to the inside of the edging, even though it shouldn't be hit by the string trimmer anymore. So hopefully the idea is that it's easier to maintain by regular mowing and no need for the string trimmer most of the time until the border needs a clean edge. In the time it's taking me to clean up, some stuff has started growing in the rocks again, but it's so much easier to take care of a little along the way than one big cleanup like I've had to do. That's one thing that I want to start to stay on top of through this year, is not trying to overdo it in big time chunks, but do a little bit every day that I can. Now that the fence is secure again, it's time to start cleaning up my actual garden beds. It's probably the tastiest grass the bunnies could eat, but it was time for it to go. When I started this cleanup, I had started some seedlings for planting once everything was done. This year I wanted to take a bit of a break from vegetables and grow some flowers. Except for okra. I love okra, so that's mostly what I'm growing this year. So now that this bed is done, it is time for the reveal. As a reminder, here's what it looked like before. And here's what it looks like now. It's definitely exciting to have it back in shape and ready to plant. I'll post an update for how it's going and whether I keep it up. If you made it to the end of this video, just wanted to say thanks for watching.